Good morning, Bonnie. How are you?
Everybody, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, the Toller Law Offices. Okay, we are a 7-attorney firm with offices in San Jose in Southern California. And we basically do all kinds of education matters, including special education, higher education. We advise people about the regional center. If you've got a case in Northern or Southern California and you want to have a independent, personalized consultation, go to our website, fill in the forms, and somebody will get back to you within 24 hours. On this show, we try to teach you about your rights and your entitlement under the IDEA Section 504 and other laws, so that when you go into an IEP meeting, you feel like you know more than you started out knowing, and so the process isn't as intimidating. But since we're at the start of a new year, and to the extent that we have any new parents watching, I want to tell you, when I started doing this, which was in 1998, Maureen Graves, who's a wonderful person and a very well-known special education attorney, said to me, Bonnie, this is like a vast area of the law, and there's always more to know, and I don't really try to do too many other things, because just to be good at this, I kind of have to work at it all the time. And, I would just like to observe that that's true. Every week, there are new decisions from all different jurisdictions, and since IDEA is a federal program, federal laws from other states can be applicable. Every month, there are new decisions from the Office of Administrative Hearings that we, the attorneys, try to read so that we know what the law is and also what issues we're likely to be successful on. And then usually once a week, I go in and I look at the COVID roundup stuff that Special Ed Connection puts out. But last night I was just looking at their topical index. There are literally so many areas that I would love to talk about and share with you. There's no reason this program has to be redundant. There's so much to know. So why am I saying all that? When you go to an IEP for the first time, it's usually a really rough experience. And I think it's rough because you're obviously upset about the fact that you're in an IEP meeting for your child. You certainly weren't contemplating that when you were pregnant. But the other reason is that people don't stop to explain things. They're pretty quick to use abbreviations and not define them. They have a lot of stock phrases. They don't explain them. And you're supposed to be able to participate meaningfully. And so to the extent that you all are gearing up for a Zoom IEP meeting in the next few months, just know that you should always send written notice, 24 hours written notice, and tell them that you're going to record the meeting. And take a stab at reading your parent rights. And if you don't understand them, get somebody to explain to you what they mean. And then when you go into that IEP meeting, if they start going too fast or rushing you or being unwilling to explain things that you ought to be able to have be explained, tell them, listen, I understand that this process is supposed to be a process that's parent friendly, and that parents should feel comfortable to ask questions, make suggestions, even politely disagree. And I need to do that in order to be able to meaningfully represent my child's interests in this meeting. Do not let people patronize you. Don't let people talk down to you. Don't let people rush you. People say to me a lot, I have a question, and it might be a stupid question. There are very few stupid questions in this business, and there are a lot of questions. So, that's really what I'm hoping that the show helps you do, is just feel a little less stressed and a little more comfortable, because I don't want to depress anybody, but my experience of being a special ed parent and everything it did to me psychologically changed me. I am a different person today, and I'm 62 years old. So a long time has passed since I had my, initial special ed journey. It changes you. It's really difficult. And we can have sympathy for the people in those meetings who come in and they're overworked and they don't have the right tools and they don't have the support. We can see their basic humanity, but we're human beings too. And we're going through a process that's really painful, and we shouldn't get beaten up a second time. The diagnosis is enough. So
Amen to that.
that's my intro for 2021.
Amen to that. And when we have knowledge, it's power, and we don't have to be as fearful, I think. You certainly over the years helped me many times, Bonnie, so that I felt walking into those meetings that I didn't have to be afraid, that I knew what I was there for, I knew what mission I was on, and I was confident that that the law was in my favor and getting what my son needed, and that I was going to be emerge victorious with what he needed. Sometimes it took longer, and sometimes I cried tears over what we had to do to fight for it. But I'm grateful that I had someone like you in my corner who had the knowledge when I didn't.
Well,
So
I mean, that said, aren't you glad that you're in an era now where you aren't going to IEP meetings?
yeah, I'm although I have gone to IEP meetings with friends as support,
Yeah,
and
but that's totally different from the
totally
experience
different.
being a parent and all the emotions that develop as you move toward your IEP meeting. Let's say if it's Monday and you know you have your meeting on Friday. It took me a long time, and I mean like maybe 5 years before I could say to myself, I'm going to go to this meeting and I'm not going to cry afterwards.
Yeah. I think I probably 5 to 7 years for me. And then they caught me off guard in one year and I went home and cried anyway. So no, I definitely think I'm with you. This has changed me too. I think in some ways it's changed me for the better, but it changed me nonetheless. And there were tears on the path. But
Oh, I'm sure it changed you for the better. I mean, look at who you are and what you do today. But it changed you.
yeah, it sure did. It sure did. Somebody wrote in and said, because they've identified themselves as being high functioning on the spectrum, and they said, those were the days of IEPs. I always loved going to my IEP back in high school. That makes me happy that they loved going to their IEP. That gives me some hope. But we've got some questions. So shall we launch into the questions?
Yeah. You read, I respond.
Okay. So first question. My question is about inclusion. What are the reasons not to include? My son has a qualifying diagnosis and an IEP. We are getting ready for his triannual, and I just got the reports from the school. We were hoping for more inclusion, working toward full inclusion. We thought the school was on the same page. They aren't. They are recommending that he have less inclusion because they say the concepts will be too hard. They say he doesn't need an aide because he has no behavior issues. He can't do the work. This is fourth grade. I feel like they gave up. We got a tutor during COVID, and he has already surpassed his goals for this year. In fact, he has already surpassed his reading goal on the proposed IEP.
Ooh.
They are giving the credit for this to the teacher, not our tutor. How can I turn this around? Can I ask them to put him in a gen ed with differentiated curriculum and an aide to keep him on task? He would need additional support outside the class. How do I ask for this? A tutor, a study hall, RSP? I also hate the testing they did. I feel like it is slanted toward their opinion of him. Our tutor has clearly shown he can do so much more than what they are pushing for. Thank you for any advice.
Well, the writer of this question gets the first award of 2021 for the best question with the most really salient issues in it. Okay. So first of all, the preference in the law is for inclusion. Okay. The district has, if you look at your IEP document, like in California anyway, there's something on the pages called an LRE analysis. They are supposed to be considering what is the least restrictive environment that can work. And it starts with the presumption that general ed can work. And if you need supports and services in general ed, they can't put you in special ed and say it's expensive to give you a one-to-one academic aide, which people have academic aides. People don't just have behavior aides. But one of the things you could ask for is you could ask for an inclusion assessment, or you could ask for an inclusion facilitator to be brought onto the case so that somebody that knows how to do inclusion could consult to the IEP team and figure out how to set this up so he can be in general ed. Based on what you're saying, it really sounds as if they have underestimated his capability. Now, you asked the question, can you be in general ed and have a modified or adapted curriculum? You can. An adapted curriculum would be a curriculum that gives you the same concepts and the same work, but less of it. A modified curriculum in gen ed, which is less favored because obviously one of the benefits, if you're going to be in gen ed and you're a fourth grader, would be being able to access the curriculum, although the other factor that weighs heavily if you don't have behavior problems is the social benefit. But yes, you can be in general ed and you can have a curriculum that's individually tailored for you. If your son or daughter has already surpassed not only their IEP goals, but even the proposed reading goal, then that means to me that your district's in trouble. They haven't offered FAPE. The IEP they constructed for the child was not appropriately ambitious, which is the language of Andrew F. So I think you need to ask for an IEE, an independent educational evaluation at district expense for psychoed and cognitive, because I think that that's going to help you convince them that he should be or she should be able to be mainstreamed. As far as this outside support, they won't usually pay for a home tutor, but you could definitely have RSP support during the week. You could have a period a day. You could have somebody push into the gen ed setting. It's all very doable. It's all very doable, and your instincts are very correct. What's going to be hard for you is just to push back against this sort of phalanx of adults that don't want to do this. And they don't want to do it because it's more work for them, and they don't want to do it because it's more expense for them. But it sounds to me like you've got a really strong case that they need to do something different.
Okay. You said something in the middle there that I got to stop and go back because it's what a lot of people are having a problem arguing right now. Schools are saying that they don't have to give an educational aid. Their aids are only for behavior problems. And it's like
That's not true. That's not true. We know there's such a thing as a health and safety aid for somebody that has a trach or a feeding tube or is in a wheelchair or needs a catheter. It's absolutely not true that the only aids that exist are for behavior. I mean, in theory, for if you need an aid to access the curriculum and you can access the general ed curriculum, you absolutely can have an academic aid. And one of the mistakes that we made, and I've said this in the show before, one of the mistakes we made when we started getting ABA in school was we allowed it to be characterized, at least in California, as a behavioral service. Now I know why, but really that's not what it was. In the good old days, in the 90s, let's say when my son was in school, there weren't these kinds of limitations on what the aide did, and that aide did everything for him. Did the academics, did the social, did the behavior, and that's really the way that the CARD curriculum is intended to work. It's teaching to every area of neurological skill deficit. So it's not about behavior only. But if your kid has behaviors, they're going to come up with some other reason why you can't have an outside behaviorist. If your kid has academic needs, now they're all of a sudden saying, oh, well, if only it were behavior, then we'd give you an aid for behavior. Also, are we sure it's not for behavioral deficits? Because those would be behaviors. If your child isn't socializing at age level, wouldn't those be behaviors? But you've got a problem that has a bunch of horns. I don't know what state you're in, but I think you should talk to an attorney.
Okay. You also brought up getting the independent evaluations, and this next question goes along with that. When you ask the school to get an outside evaluator, Do you get any say in who it is? I'm afraid that it will be someone the school has a relationship and it will just waste my child's time.
Uh, you are not required to use the people on the district list. You can use somebody from outside of that list if they have the same qualifications as a district person. And typically they have a list of people who aren't employed by the district, but that they have a contract in place with. 99% of the time when I go down those lists, I don't use those people, and we could have a whole show on why that is. But occasionally, for some reason, somebody slips through the cracks, and um, you get a great person on the list, and they do the evaluation, and it's amazing. I mean, Abby Rosenberg, I'm mentioning her on the show. She's a speech therapist. She's down in Orange County. She was on the list for a client who's in the San Gabriel Valley. She did one of the best speech evaluations I've ever seen at district expense. So I don't really understand why they're letting her do that, but it's great for my client, you know?
I love that. Okay, so we can say I don't want somebody on the list, I want somebody else.
Totally.
Okay.
If we need to do another show on IEEs, we always can.
We might need to. Okay, next question. I believe my child's team at school has been making decisions that are outside his IEP and were never discussed with me. They changed the amount of time he was in inclusion. They are arguing this was necessary due to COVID and distance learning. Can they just decide to do that?
Can you read the last two sentences again, please?
Yes, they are arguing that this was necessary to have him to change the amount of time he was in inclusion due to COVID
Mhm.
and distance learning. Can they just decide to do that? Don't they have to do an IEP meeting to change that
No,
by?
they don't have to do an IEP meeting, but they do have to give you prior written notice.
Ah. And
And
if they didn't,
and
what's
well, then it's a denial of FAPE. It's a change of placement without an IEP meeting or parental consent. But a lot of the districts now have been using the prior written notice rather than amending the IEP or holding an IEP meeting, and I think that's because they have so many IEPs to do.
yeah.
But if you got nothing and you found out about it via the back door, that's another one where it'd be nice to have you supplement your question and tell us what things they changed. We could
Well,
just
it's
a little more.
it says that they changed the amount of time that he was in inclusion. I don't know whether they upped it or
Well,
reduced
probably,
it.
presumably not. But
Right.
but that's going to come down to how the IEP was written and whether they gave you notice. I mean, the prior written notice statute is very clear, and we can go over it on the show next week if you want. But it says anytime the district proposes to initiate or change, and then it says the eligibility, uh, identification, assessment, placement, so on, they have to give you written notice. So
All right.
that's a change in placement. If you cut your gen ed minutes by 25%, that's a change in placement. And for what it's worth, I don't really understand why they would have to cut your gen ed minutes, because there are dozens and hundreds of kids across the country that are in Zoom meetings all day for general ed. It's not as if general ed decreased. I just think it doesn't add up. You should ask them for write them a letter and say, I need prior written notice on these changes you made to my child's IEP.
Okay. And then I didn't send you this question, but I've gotten probably 3 or 4 comments in the last week from people who are telling me that the school is saying that their child no longer, different people and in different states, that their child no longer needs OT. And we're talking about kids that are in kindergarten and first grade. And I'm wondering if this is a trend, if this is something that you're seeing in Southern California, and is this because of COVID? And I've never heard of schools trying to cheat a kid out of at least their OT.
I
I just like,
I suspect that it is because um, that's not a service that's easy to deliver virtually. If it's fine motor, there's going to be hand over hand stuff. If it's gross motor, you're obviously going to be working with suspended equipment. It really, I think we all have learned that generally speaking, distance learning is a problem for more people than it's helpful. But even within that larger framework, it's clear that doing certain types of interventions would be harder. And I think that's the reason you're getting that. If we write this out of the IEP, then we don't have a problem with noncompliance and so on.
Right.
So,
But parents should fight that tooth and nail, should they not, Bonnie?
well, if your child needs occupational therapy, just know that if they don't get it while they're young, by the time they're 12, the district's going to say it's too late to teach you handwriting and printing and all that. We just want you to keyboard. So you really do have to get it now.
Yeah. But if they're saying your child no longer needs it, how do we fight that, Bonnie? Is that a thing where we go, show us
You ask
where
you ask for an IEE.
Okay.
If they're proposing to end the service, they need to demonstrate. I mean, first of all, if they propose to end the service and you don't agree and you invoke stay put, they can't end the service. But secondarily, in order to resolve the dispute, an outside evaluation to look at their, the areas of need and how they're best addressed during COVID would be reasonable. And since we're not going to do the IEE discussion this time, but this has just come up, districts will oftentimes, when you ask for an IEE, they'll write you back and say, hey, how about, can we have another person in the district do a second evaluation? And the answer to that is no, you don't get a second chance. The law wants to ensure that the district knows that the first evaluation is a strong evaluation and there's no provision for them to get a second opportunity to do it. I'm in the middle of an interesting compliance complaint, and I'm filing a lot of these days, and that's probably something we should talk about on the show too, because people can file their own compliance complaints. I am filing complaints with the California Department of Education to get IEP meetings scheduled on time, to get observations and assessments done on time, and so on. So in a particular situation, I have a student who's 18, and he has 3 years worth of, let's say, transition evaluations. They're all terrible. They're all terrible. I asked the parent to send a letter that I wrote for her to the special education director. And I said that, I had parents say that we wanted an outside transition assessment. The director writes back and says, well, no, I'm not going to agree to that because the assessments that you referred to in the IEP weren't really assessments. They weren't complete. They weren't formal. They're informal. So A, I don't have to give you an IEE because we haven't fully assessed yet. And B, I don't have to file for due process and defend these evaluations because they aren't really evaluations. So that's pretty crazy. But I'm not ready to file for due process yet. So I have filed a compliance complaint with the California Department of Education. And in essence, what I said is, how come if these assessments were incomplete, they were used to develop a transition plan? And how come nobody ever said that these were, what would the word be? They were temporary and incomplete in nature, and we're going to do a more thorough evaluation later. I mean, I was just like, wow, that's pretty brash to take that position. But I actually think the reason she did it is because she forgot that the parent had an attorney. The letter came from the mom. She read it. She was like, oh, I'll try this. It's a, it's something that she's done before. So you gotta watch what they respond back with. And I think that would probably be a good show, would be all the things the districts say to get out of doing IEEs.
I would actually love that because I think a lot of people, and by the way, Kayla is joining us for the first time and agreeing with you. And she says that IEE has made a tremendous result for her family in particular. I think a lot of people are afraid to ask for that independent evaluation at the school's expense because it feels like you're going to get a no. But
Well,
are they allowed to say no?
Yeah, they're allowed to say no, but if they say no, they have to file for due process and prove their evaluation was appropriate. And they don't really want to have to file for due process and add that to their administrative responsibilities. That's why the issue with the case that I was just talking about was interesting, because she said that we haven't evaluated yet. And since we haven't evaluated yet, I don't have to file for due process to defend my evaluation.
Craziness. And I just want to say, for people who are afraid that the school will file due process against them, been there, done that twice. They filed due process against me, and I'm here to tell you that that is a pathway that is very viable for getting what you need. I
And
can't say a lot
also,
more than that.
if the heat gets too hot, you can always withdraw your IEE request, but why not try it and see if they'll pay for it?
Well, and I saw that when they filed due process against me, I thought it was the end of the world, and instead it was them getting me into a room where they could make a settlement that would be a closed settlement. And that there are worse things than that, let me just tell you. So,
So let's, if we get burning questions, we love to answer those. And to the extent that we have time left over, we'll start talking about IEEs next week.
okay. We only have 2 minutes, unfortunately, right now.
I've got another meeting, so I'm going to jump off 2 minutes early, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, but please just tell us about Tollner Law Offices again, and then we'll let you go.
Tollner Law Offices, we're on the web. Look us up. Let us hear from you. There's help for your problem.
Bonnie, we adore you. I'm so glad to be by your side in 2021. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching Autism Live. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out